Okay, so Schneider Electric, you've fairly recently introduced some new features to the EcoStruxure IT DCIM or DCIM, the software solution. And I guess it'd just be good to understand a little bit of the background as to, what are the underlying reasons that have meant you've made these new features in, introduction.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting time for DCIM, I think, Phil, as an industry, because it really sits at, I think, the intersection of where IT and OT meet. I mean, that is fundamentally where DCIM tools exist. It's the underlying physical infrastructure, but also DCIM has the awareness of what is the IT that's plugged into that if you fully deploy the solution. And one of the things that we're seeing in the industry is a bigger focus on sustainability. Now, it varies in different parts of the world. Obviously, in Europe, you have the EED and some of the reporting requirements that are coming in. But in general, when you look at the energy consumption of IT, and as well as data centers, and certainly with the recent AI boom, you're seeing a greater focus coming from governments and industry on what are we doing to ensure that the energy consumption of IT is being done in a responsible and professional way. And we really feel that DCIM is at a unique position to give insight for customers on that energy consumption, because in effect, we already have a lot of the data. If somebody's deployed a DCIM solution, we have the data. But what we realized, and it really came from a project we did with our own CIO team, is the tools weren't oriented in a way, and it wasn't as easy to get that data and organize that data as it needed to be, number one. And number two, sometimes the data was incomplete. So we've done a lot of things recently, and with some of our recent announcements, to make it easier for customers to meet a very simple challenge of how much energy is my IT consuming, and can I report on it so that I can manage it more effectively. And so we're really quite excited about what we've recently brought to the market, and we think we're getting some pretty good response to it as well.
And just perhaps more generally, before we drill down, I mean, Schneider Electric, you've obviously got a well-earned reputation for being at the forefront when it comes to sustainability and where the data center industry, in this occasion, but I know you work in virtually every industry, and it's a major focus for you. So just thoughts is this DCIM upgrade, whatever you call it, part of that strategy? And just more generally, I suppose, what are you seeing sustainability wise within the space, and on a global basis as to the actions required? Is it fast enough for where we need to be? Just your thoughts, I suppose, as to what is going on, if that's all right to ask.
Well, I think I'll let Alison answer that. She's a sustainability expert on our team, and so I think she's in a better position to give some of the detail on that. So, Alison.
Yeah. So when it comes from a sustainability point of view, data centers, I think everyone realizes that they're consuming quite a significant amount of energy and electricity, and the grid is finding itself really tense right now, where there's a massive strain on the grid to respond to the needs of every customer and every company. So what we're seeing right now throughout the world is where data center growth is exponential, right? In certain countries, we're seeing regulations coming into those countries as well to limit the amount of data centers that are being built, but also to start controlling the energy consumption of these data centers. So we're actually seeing regulations matching the amount of data centers in said countries. So Europe is at the forefront right now with the Energy Efficiency Directive, and with other regulations, right? The EU Commission has set this Energy Efficiency Directive that's coming into force in September of this year. But then Germany, for example, is adapting it to their own sets of rules. Netherlands is doing the same. So we're really seeing regulations spread throughout not only the European continent, but we're also seeing NAM and international setting regulations as well. So when it comes to sustainability is a way to limit the energy consumption. But at the end of the day, it's also a way to reduce costs related to energy and reduce waste also that are in these data centers with all these IT assets that are being managed. So Yes, we're seeing DCIM play a role, and we are seeing an opportunity to help customers manage those IT assets and also report on the regulations that are coming in.
Just to follow up on that, you may or may not have an opinion, but do you think that this legislation that's now coming in, is it because the industry hasn't moved fast enough and so it's been given a little nudge, or do you think it was going to happen anyway, however well the industry performed, legislation was inevitable? As I say, is it a sort of timely reminder that the industry needs to pull its socks up a bit when it comes to sustainability?
So I think one of the main metrics, right, that the industry has been tracking is PUE. That's been around for decades almost at this point, and it's stagnating, right? Progress on PUE and reducing PUE is stagnating across sites. So I do think the regulations coming in is to push customers to start actually reporting, but it also to align, right, on key metrics and ways to understand what these data centers are actually consuming, because a lot of the times these are assumptions that are being made, right? So regulations are creating baselines for companies to be able to actually make progress. So I do think it's a long time coming if you look at all the certifications and voluntary initiatives that are around. This is just a end all be all. Regulations do help push things along.
Well, I would say, Phil, just to augment what Alison's saying is, all of the metrics that are in the EED, they all make sense from our point of view, and they really came from the industry and they came from things that we're doing. So as Alison was saying, it's really the EED is formalizing it and putting a structure around it. And then where there's going to be a lot of discussion is around how good does your data need to be in order to report against that? Because if you take it, part of the reason PUE is stagnated, using Alison's term there, is because sometimes you don't have all the data. And so, you get into some of the smaller data centers, server rooms, wiring closets, which, again, some of those aren't covered by the EED, but we think they will be. It's not easy to get some of these metrics. And I think that's really what's going to be interesting for those in Europe, right? Now, the other thing that we, for customers in Europe, about how do you actually, what level of detail do I need in order to report against it? And so this is some of where we've been developing tools to model it out and make it a little easier. In the other parts of the world, like in the US where I live, is, I would make the argument to many CIOs, the metrics that the EED adopted are the ones that we would consider best practice. So why not use those to report everywhere? And our philosophy on it is, look, even if it's model based, it's good to start getting a benchmark. It's good to start tracking this information, even down to the smallest sites, and then you can get better over time. So your question is quite interesting. It's like, was it because the industry wasn't doing the right things that the regulations came in? No, I think it's because the industry was doing the right things. Now, because it's becoming so prominent in the discussions, the EED is formalizing it. And so for those in Europe, it's going to be a real question about, what's the level of detail that I need in order to comply and be auditable against the regulation. But for other people in the world where you don't have quite the same strict regulation in place, the argument is that you should be doing this anyway. And we have examples of our own CIO team implementing our tools and getting some great results from a business standpoint. So.
Okay, and in terms of the DCIM features that have been introduced, that to what we've been discussing, that they are basically, in simple terms, they are providing more of these metrics, more of this visibility. I think you talk about enhanced visibility, historical data analysis, and things like fast, intuitive reporting. So fundamentally, the objective is to provide more of this information that whether you developed it specifically for the directive or coincidentally, it's a lot of the information that people will be required to report on. Is that right?
Yeah, so a lot of the learning that we did and what we built in was watching our own CIO team do their own green IT initiative internally. So they started using our own tools. They were doing a refresh of their IT infrastructure. And the EED was in the background because you saw the EED coming. So obviously those two things really played together. Now, what have we done is, you know, a lot of the work we did was around trying to make it easier for somebody to get those metrics. And again, as I mentioned, one of the big challenges is that people don't always have the data. And we did not limit it. You know, I think the EED, if I remember, Allison, it's like 500 kilowatts and above, right? Depending on, and certain countries might be having a lower threshold. We actually think, you know, you should be implementing this at even the smallest server rooms and wiring closets, because actually our CIO team, that's where they were going, was they were going after some very small sites. So when you have incomplete data, what do you do? The reality is that we've spent the last, you know, 10 to 20 years working on data centers and modeling out PUE and what that looks like. And we've spent the last 10 or 15 years, Schneider, I'd argue, has been one of the leaders in sustainability as a business. You take that combined expertise, and I guess, you know, we say it's model-based, data-based modeling. Let's call it AI, because that's everybody has to use AI these days as a term. But in effect, it's effectively, we looked at our knowledge of what we had internally, and we did use algorithms to help people start modeling out what these sites look like. And so now you can very easily, and the goal is to make it a push, you know, with the push of a button, you can get the PUE of a site in effect. So it's a very simple configuration. And what we do is we give people, based on the model, we give them a level of confidence about what is the PUE at that site. And if we get more data, the confidence level gets better. If we have less data, the confidence gets bigger. And we're going to keep working on this because we have data coming into our cloud, and we can continue to work on and analyzing. These models are going to get better and better. And so in effect, it's a very easy way to get a baseline of what is your energy consumption, including the losses of the physical infrastructure. And it's really based off of, you know, 15, 20 years of experience of looking at these different sites and doing it in a way where, based on data, based on those models and the algorithms we developed, it becomes very simple. And that's really that's what we're most excited about, is that it's enabling people to get a very fast and easy way to get started on this journey of, you know, really measuring what is your performance.
And I guess the next logical step at some stage, and it may already be sort of happening to a certain extent, is once you've got all this information, clearly you can take actions based on it. I'm just wondering what the balance is at the moment, and maybe plans for the future in terms of humans versus, you mentioned AI. Obviously, AI has the potential to take a load of data and maybe recommend, you know, some actions based on it. So just your thoughts, I suppose, as to what you are doing with it, or plans to do with the decision making beyond, you know, the raw input of data that you're collecting.
Well, you know, I think we're okay. So if you look at it right now, you know, getting visibility automatically gives you opportunity to save. Okay. And I'm talking about real business results, not just, you know, not just reporting at sustainability. We have an example of their Lexington Smart Factory. I mean, Allison, the Lexington Smart Factory that our own CIO team did, can you go through that quickly? Kind of what were the results that we achieved just by going off, you know, just by going off and looking and realizing there were some low-hanging opportunities. So what was the experience with our own CIO team?
Yeah, so on just that site, which had about 10 network closets, 10 IT rooms, so not full data center, right? They were able to start monitoring and tracking their energy consumption, and they actually found zombie servers, and they found certain inefficiencies, and with the recommendations based on that we were providing with our DCIM solution. And of course, with some upgrades to their assets, they were able to reduce their energy consumption by 28% that first year, right? So from doing that exercise, reducing 28% their energy consumption, and that was around 30% of costs. So they were able to translate that into cost. And when you look at the sustainability side, right, they were able to reduce their carbon emissions by 17 tons that first year, just on that site, which is massive.
So, you know, I think that, Phil, gives you some insight into the way this is going to play out. Is when people go out and start measuring it, it's going to point them in a direction about where's your worst performing site. And in this case, Lexington, they knew there was a lot of opportunities. Now, our software wasn't smart enough to tell them, hey, go virtualize this and go do, you know, the solution you still need a human in there. But because they started running these tools and looking at it, it pointed them in a direction to go. Okay. And what I think will happen is over time, as we start learning more from customers about what are their opportunities, you can see a day not too far in the future where we can sit there and go, hey, based on what we see and based on benchmarks of other things that are similar, we think you may have a 30% opportunity at this site, and you should go look there. So that's really where we are in terms of sophistication of the tool, is giving people a very easy way to get a very broad set of view of the complex hybrid infrastructure and enable them to start finding out where they want to start looking, and then really tracking it's a continuous improvement exercise. And but again, some of the savings that they got at our Lexington factories, because they went and did some higher level IT stuff, they bought some new IT equipment, they virtualized things, and they were able to achieve, again, a 30% energy reduction, but that was a tremendous ROI from a business standpoint. So sustainability is good for business. I mean, I think that's an important message that we're trying to give, is a lot of times when someone takes a sustainability initiative, a green IT initiative, they end up with a better solution that's more resilient and has a lower energy consumption. I really believe, we don't have all the data to support that assertion, but I think there's a lot of evidence of that will be the case. So we're excited about this, not just because of the EED, but we think it's also, it's going to lead to less waste and better performing IT infrastructure.
Yeah, so I guess it would be good to understand in terms of whether it's what you're doing and or combined with the directive. One of the problems often people, certainly customers, maybe say, is that when they're looking at different data centers, it's very difficult to obtain, shall we say, consistent, statistics. Everyone will say, oh yes, we've got a green data center, and they might be able to back it up with a different, depending on how they interpret it. Do you think with combination of DCIM and this directive, at some stage we might arrive in a nice place where you can compare 5 different data centers with the exact same set of metrics, the actual performance of each data center, as opposed to some of the marketing stroke greenwashing that might still be going on?
Well, I think that will be a byproduct of the EED defining this more clearly. And again, it's all relative to the standard. I mean, it's a CENELEC standard, I believe. Alison, which one is it that they're...
Yeah, so they're using CENELEC methodology, which has been around for years, right, to calculate these metrics, so especially PUE. It's the 50,604.2, if you want to go look into it. But so there's a lot of standardization, right? And so these regulations that are coming into force, and the ED in particular, is if we're looking at the same methodology to calculate these standard metrics, then you can compare apples to apples, right? But if you're not using the same methodology across your sites to be able to track and measure these metrics, you're not going to be able to compare. You're not going to be able to have a good baseline. So that's the power of regulations and standards. It allows you to do so.
Yeah, so you've had this standard in place that define all this stuff. Now, whether people actually follow that, who knows? We've all seen there's 2 things that have happened in the industry where not everyone's PUE was calculated the same way, and people would play some games with it. I think that's fair to say. And the second thing is there's been a self-selection bias, is when people go and publish, oh, we have a PUE of 1.15 or whatever. Is that just for one data center on the best day of the year? Is that an average number? Like, what is that number? We don't know. And that's where I think, rightfully so, there's been some suspicion about some of these marketing, let's call it the marketing initiatives, talking about how green data centers are. And that is a role where regulations and standards come in, is it's all defined. So now the question is going to be, if you have to comply with the regulation and it's auditable, that's going to take away, let's call it, some of the gameplay, and that's one of the things we did with the tools. We built in that methodology so that when you run a report, it is consistent with the standards that are in place, and it should give you a pretty good estimate. And again, there's going to be this debate over, is a model-based solution good enough, and is that good enough to be able to comply with the regulations? And there's going to be a discussion around that. But our broader point here is that if I use these standards and I use a model-based solution for those areas where maybe I don't have all the metering in place that you need to comply with the regulations, it's going to give you, you know, the goal here is to make sure you're running better infrastructure and that it's as energy efficient as possible. It's as robust as possible. I mean, let's not lose sight of the goal here, Phil. That's the goal for the industry. And so we were looking at that broader goal as well as, you know, the more narrow goal of, hey, can I report against the EED? We help you with that. But there's a broader goal about using these model-based, data-based, AI engine, whatever marketing term you want to put around it, is really trying to help people get a handle on their whole infrastructure. Because keep in mind, I mean, our best estimates is at least half of energy consumption is outside of data centers, of IT energy consumption. Probably about half of it is in server rooms, wiring closets, networking closets. And today the EED doesn't cover that, but that's half the problem. You know, it doesn't get the headlines that like the large data centers get, but it's still there. And we would argue that over time, you know, regulators like to stay busy too. I mean, they're going to keep lowering this threshold. It would be what I would guess is they're going to go from 500 kilowatts to 250 to 100. It's going to keep coming down. Why not get ahead of that on best practices and make sure that you are looking at your infrastructure, particularly when it's very cost effective and very easy to do so. So anyway, those are some thoughts for you.
And just maybe as we finish up, do you think now the appetite, I mean, we've had conversations in the past about similar issues around sustainability. Do you think the industry overall now has a genuine appetite to move towards a generally sustainable industry, and whether that's because there's the stick of legislation, or they actually understand, to your point, that you know, they're going to end up with a much more efficient data center, which is going to save them costs, improve performance, etc. Do you think the industry is now, that point has been made and is understood, or do you think some folks are still slightly dragging their heels, and with some of the political things going on, are perhaps, you know, hoping that there'll be a sort of, if not a reversal, at least a slowing down of some of these environmental goals, and therefore they maybe don't need to act as quickly as perhaps is necessary?
Well, you know, speaking for the industry as a whole is a difficult question. I don't pretend to do that, but I'll give you what my observations are. Is certainly, you know, when you look at Europe, the way that Europe, even culturally, is looking at sustainability is much different than the U.S. I can say that, for instance. Okay, so I think Europe's, especially with the EED and the regulations, certainly it's going to continue the focus on the sustainability. I would argue, you know, you will see different approaches in different countries. So, for instance, in the U.S., there's just been a regulation passed by it's coming through the SEC for publicly reporting companies that they have to start reporting against sustainability metrics. I find it hard. So it's not a regulation like the EED. It's coming through a different mechanism. I find it hard to believe to see that that's going to come to a complete end. Okay. Now, you know, so I think really the debate in the US is going to be about what level of detail and what kind of regulation is it and how do you actually report against it. But no matter what, somebody's going to ask you, how much energy are you consuming as a business? Right. And I find it hard to believe that that question is going to disappear. And if you're a CIO, you know, and like something, there was some data I saw that something like more than 90% of CEOs view that they're going to have to take sustainability seriously as a broad topic. Now, if that's the case, the CEO has to report on sustainability metrics. It's inevitable at some point, somebody will turn to the CIO, and the CIO is going to have two roles in this. The CIO is going to have one role about, they're going to have to put in place the sustainability metrics and the software systems that are going to allow you to report against that. The second thing is, it's inevitable somebody's going to ask them a question, what are you doing about it? And how much is our IT, you know, consuming? So to me, it seems inevitable if I'm a CIO, I'm going to have to answer these questions. And again, based off of our own, and we've published our data on our own green IT project, what I encourage people to look at is when you do a green IT project, you get a better performing infrastructure. So the reason to do it is not only to reduce energy consumption. The reason to do it is it's forcing you to go and take a look and start monitoring and measuring what is actually happening on your site. How many companies actually know how many assets are on their network? I mean, the reality is they don't talk about it publicly, but the reality is when I talk to a lot of CIO infrastructure people, they have no idea how many devices are on their network. That is not a good situation from a cybersecurity standpoint, from an energy consumption standpoint. And Phil, you've been in the industry for a while, as have I. I mean, we've been talking about zombie servers in this industry for 20 years, and they're still out there. I mean, this is not best practice in how to operate an IT infrastructure. So, you know, it's not new what we're talking about here. The industry has been proactive on this, and that's where the industry should be congratulated, right? But getting it in place now with the data and the modeling and the tools have gotten so much better at being able to give you visibility. And when you have visibility, you end up addressing your biggest problems or your biggest challenges, and you end up with a better result at the end. It's good for business. You're going to get good ROI on it. You're going to get a lower energy consumption. And I would argue as a result, it'll become more resilient and more secure. So, anyway, I think it's a mix of motivations that are going to come into this thing. And whether it's because I'm motivated because the regulations are requiring me to. And by the way, if you're a multinational and I have to report in Europe, why not just report on all of your stuff? Because it's all based off of standards and best practice. So it seems kind of silly not to. And for those people who aren't multinational, who don't have stuff in Europe, you look at what we did with our own green IT project in Schneider, and you can see the types of results that you can get, which are quite impressive. And so anyway, that's I guess where my thoughts go on it. And again, there's a lot, one man's opinion, but we'll see how it plays out. But we really believe if we make it easy enough for people to get visibility, that's been the key. It's been too hard. It's been too hard to get the data. It's been too hard to get the reports. It's been too difficult. I mean, I was shocked when I watched our own IT department use our own tools. I was shocked about how difficult it was to get some really basic question answered. And so we're pretty excited that we've made a lot of progress to make it easier.
And just fine, and I don't want to, it may be for a separate conversation, but we've referenced AI a couple of times, and it's no secret that AI is going to be piling into the data center industry, you know, new infrastructure being built, etc. How would either or both of you see that changing the sort of landscape? Because if the industry is making good progress, but depending on who you talk to, the power consumption is going to go up quite significantly for all this AI, these AI applications. Do you think that's a real spanner in the works, or again, is the industry sort of got the answers? It's on the right sort of roadmap to tackling the AI explosion, if you like?
Well, yeah, well, it is an explosion that's going on in terms of the build out. I mean, I don't think that's any secret. And you know, look, there's a broader question that you're dancing on that really, you know, for other people to answer, which is the power consumption that we're investing in AI worth it? Right. And that's kind of like, you know, that's a higher level question. That's like a societal level question. Okay. But the reality is it's here. Okay. So the energy consumption is coming. The best thing the industry can do is make sure it's being as responsible as possible with that energy that's being deployed. And this is not related to software. There's a lot of work happening around liquid cooling, and it's driving an awful lot of innovation in data center design. I mean, the densities that we're looking at on these data centers is far beyond anything we would have been talking about realistically, you know, 5 years ago. Okay. So, and that's driving activity like liquid cooling and different architectures, and how do we get smarter at our energy consumption? But even if we get really smart, you know, it's likely that overall energy consumption, the nominal rate will go up. Okay. Now, the thing that we're also focused on is deployment of AI. You know, today what you're seeing is the learning that the large systems need is what's getting deployed today. What's unknown is once those are deployed, and then you have to start deploying those models somewhere, where are those going to get deployed? And you've seen recent announcements from Microsoft and Apple and others about they're actually deploying AI on the device itself. Okay. Do we see some of these models getting deployed at edge sites, like, you know, server rooms and wiring closets and inference servers sitting, you know? So to me, that's where the interesting game is like, it could be that as AI, we go through this first phase of learning servers and they're being deployed in central data centers. You could see a lot more energy consumption happening with the edge devices themselves, as well as the hybrid IT infrastructure in total, because we don't know yet where all these, where's AI going to get deployed at the end of the day. And if it starts driving larger energy consumption in the hybrid infrastructure and server rooms, wiring closet, endpoint devices, you know, that makes the situation even more complex. You know, because again, if you believe that half of all IT energy consumption is outside of data centers, which again is a debatable point, but it's some significant number. you could actually see that accelerate as well with AI. We're not seeing that today, but it could. And that's so we're looking at, as Schneider as a company is looking at, what do we do to make sure the AI data centers that are built today are as energy efficient as possible? Okay. And then we're also trying to anticipate what's going to happen in the future as AI gets deployed more broadly. And how do you help the industry meet that challenge? So I don't think there's a clear answer to that question, but it's certainly coming.
And maybe just finally, because I get carried on, it's good to have your time, but in terms of sustainability, where are we now in terms of, if you're a data center and customers are looking at you, is sustainability a real differentiator right now? And if it is, how long before it becomes table stakes, if you like, that everyone's going to have a minimum sustainability sort of badge that they can show? Just your thoughts as to how much of a differentiator it can be. So another driver for people, not just saving costs or meeting legislation. They might actually win some customers or not lose customers because they can show their sustainability credentials.
Well, it's an interesting question. I guess I'd phrase it this way: is if I was a provider today, right? If you believe our theory that CIOs are going to start paying attention to what's the energy they're consuming and their carbon footprint, which the EED is inevitably going to start driving them to do that, what will happen is the CIOs are going to start asking for that data from their providers. Again, they have their own server rooms, wiring closets that they've got to go and collect the data. But if I have something sitting in the cloud, I'm going to need numbers out of my cloud provider on what is the energy consumption of the applications I've running in the cloud. Or if I have on-premise servers that are sitting in a co-location facility, I'm going to need the co-location facility to report metrics to me as well. Okay. That is a set of questions that, generally speaking, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a lot of those providers didn't have to provide that data, number one. Number two, what's going to happen is if it's with the EED, now, if I'm the CIO and I need you, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, to report to me what your metrics are, how do I know that your metrics are right? Because I'm going to be held accountable for it. So whether there's an opportunity for those providers to differentiate against each other, I don't know. But what I would say is if they don't get really good at providing this information to their customers, they're going to get left behind. So it's their level of sophistication of giving externally data on the performance of their data centers and their energy consumption has to go up from where it was in the past. And that will, in my opinion, start becoming table stakes. So is there an opportunity to differentiate? I don't know, right? Maybe in the short run, but in the long run, if you don't get really good at reporting these metrics and this data, what is the carbon intensity of my energy? How much energy did I actually consume? If you can't answer those questions for their customers, they're going to go find another provider, because especially if there's a regulation like the EED behind it, I've got to do it, and it's got to be auditable, and it has to be good data. And I don't think the regulator is going to accept, well, that's just the number they gave me. I think the regulator is going to say, no, you better make sure that number's right, because that's the question that's going to be asked. So I think the level of scrutiny, I do think this is an area where regulations are very powerful. Again, there's been best practice. The industry should be congratulated on the progress that's made. We've gotten much more energy efficient data centers, but now forcing it to be very robust, consistent, and consistent with the standards is, I do think that's a byproduct of the EED, and it will turn things, differentiation. I don't know. Do we think we have a role to play in order to help people meet those requirements? Yes, we do. Are we excited about doing that for our customers? Yes, we are. But if you're a provider, they're going to have to get really good at reporting this data in a consistent and auditable way, or they're going to have some challenges. They're challenging questions to answer from their customers. So.
Okay, it's been great to chat to both yourself, Kevin, and Alison. Appreciate your time and some fascinating insights into both what Schneider as a company is doing to help folks and what's going on in the industry. So for now, at least, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.